Hi, this is Rick Shanklin, Morning Coordination Meteorologist with the National Weather Service in Paducah, Kentucky. And what we're going to do here is take a look at the deadly Evansville area tornado of November 6, 2005 in terms of a weather pattern review, as well as take a fairly in-depth look at the radar data for the event. And of course, we're looking at an aerial survey of the tornado damage. This is Eastbrook Mobile Home Park on the south side of Evansville, where unfortunately 20 people perished in the tornado at about 2 a.m. And you also notice at the top side of the picture the Ohio River. This is looking south toward Kentucky, where the tornado touched down initially, about 3 miles north of Smith Mills, Kentucky. Here we're looking at a photograph of the tornado as it passed across the south side of Evansville from the perspective of a webcam at Deaconess Hospital on the east side of Evansville. And some of the particulars about the tornado. Of course, it was a very intense tornado, almost at the violent stage, an upper end EF3 with a peak wind, at least that time as we rated them, at 200 miles an hour. The path length was 41 miles, a very long track for a tornado, even of that intensity. The maximum width was 500 yards. Much of the track was 200 to 300 yards, but again was up to 500 yards. Or about a third of a mile, or nearly a third of a mile in width. 25 people killed, 20 again at the Eastbrook Mobile Home Park. At least 200 were injured, many of those requiring hospitalization. It was on the ground a total of 43 minutes as it tracked northeast between 1:39 a.m. and 2:22 a.m. And it was the deadliest tornado in the U.S. from 1999 until 2011. April 27th, 2011, the Tuscaloosa, Alabama area tornado that occurred then had more fatalities. The deadliest tornado in Indiana since 1974, that's actually the April 3rd, 4th, 1974 outbreak. And the deadliest tornado in our area of the National Weather Service since before 1950. The only one that comes to mind that had more fatalities is the Great Tri-State tornado, which killed about 700 people on March 18th of 1925. And here we're looking at the entire track of the tornado from just north of Smith Mills in Henderson County, where the tornado touched down and then progressed northeast, crossing the Ohio River 3 times, moving across the southeast side of Evansville into Warwick County, south of Booneville, and ending near Gentryville along the Warwick-Spencer County line. This is a pretty interesting picture. We're looking at the tornado track as it moves across a field and scours the ground, and also does quite a bit of damage to a farmstead here. This is in the river bottoms along the Henderson-Vanderburgh County line. Again, the tornado intensity was EF3. Back then we actually used F versus the EF designation, but it was mainly in the upper F2 to upper F3 intensity, so quite intense. In fact, its average intensity was greater than many EF4 tornadoes, and it was intense from the point it touched down to almost the point that it dissipated. Total dollar loss in the hundreds of millions, speeds quite rapid, which is not uncommon for wintertime tornadoes, 60 to 70 miles an hour, 500 plus buildings or homes destroyed. 3 locations were at the upper end of the F3, and I can tell you from surveying the damage that there were 1 or 2 locations we were toying with the idea of going to the very low end of an EF4, very close to that intensity. Again, 25 fatalities, 20 of those occurring in Eastbrook Mobile Home Park. 24 of the 25 fatalities were in mobile homes. One of those was also in a vehicle. And here we have a look at the track of the tornado as it was across southeast Vanderburgh County, actually looking at radar data. This is the velocity data from the Owensville, Indiana radar, the blue indicating very fast motion, and yellow in particular very fast motion toward the radar and the red away, so we have a very tight velocity couplet here indicating the tornado location This was probably about 3 or 4 minutes before the tornado was at this location, which is the location of the clock. And as we look at the surface weather map for the evening prior to the tornado event, we can see low pressure centered across central Missouri with the attendant cold front extending southwest of there into eastern Oklahoma. But across our region, we can look at the temperatures, and we see 72 degrees at Evansville, 70 at Huntingburg, 71 at Lawrenceville, 73 at Harrisburg. Unseasonably warm air. This is at 6 p.m., by the way, on November 5th. With southerly winds, the dew point temperatures are in the mid 50s across the region, 56 at Evansville, 57 at Harrisburg. But if we turn our attention to the south across Mississippi and Alabama, we can see some even higher values to the south, and with southerly winds, we'd expect some of those to move or in fact north into our region. 61 degrees here in northern Alabama, a couple places, including Huntsville there. So again, we would expect those to progress north over time. And as we look at the midnight graphic, we can see the low pressure center has raced northeast toward Chicago, with the front now extending south across Illinois and southeast Missouri. But look at these low level dew point temperatures have really increased across western Kentucky. Has jumped all the way up to 60 at Evansville, 63 at Harrisburg. Temperatures still very mild, 71 at Evansville, 73 at Harrisburg. Again, this is at midnight in November. Not a good scenario when we have that much low-level instability across the region. And when we look at 1 a.m., we can see the front has progressed across southern Illinois to about the Mississippi River. Same soupy air mass across our region, western Kentucky, southwest Indiana, southern Illinois. At this point, then when we move on to 2 a.m., we can see the temperatures have dropped a little bit, but the dew point 64 degrees. 2 a.m. in November, 64 degree dew point. Very moist air in the low levels of the atmosphere, and that is part of the equation that can produce tornadoes, and unfortunately did on this particular night. When we look at the wind graphics here, we can see the low-level winds, 0 to 1 kilometers, 35 to 40 knots. It's about 40, 45 miles an hour. That's in place already across our region at midnight. When we look in the upper levels of the atmosphere, we can see a very strong band of winds across southern Missouri that are heading to the east, 70 to 80 knots, 80 to 90 mile an hour winds. So far, we're generally okay because we don't have those strong upper level winds in combination with the low level winds. If that were to occur, which as we found out, as you will see, they did occur, and that's when we can get an enhanced risk for tornadoes if we have the other factors in place, which, as we just saw, we did with the instability. Here we're looking at the radar data. We can see the storms across southern Illinois extending back into northeast Arkansas in a general linear shape, which is common for our part of the world in the wintertime. When we move on to 1 a.m., we can see those winds are still in place in the lower part of the atmosphere. But now we see that the upper level band of strong winds, 70 to 80 knots, has now progressed and overlapped with the strongest band of lower level winds, and in the region that it does that is where we really need to pay close attention for the potential for storms to develop rotation and even become tornadic. And here we're looking at the radar data also at 1 a.m. and you can see the storms have progressed east to about the Wabash and Ohio rivers. This is the location of the Crittenden, Webster County tornado, also an EF3 strong tornado. A lot of damage with that. Fortunately, not as long of a track as occurred with the Evansville area tornado that touched down just north of Smith Mills and progressed east to around Gentryville. And here we see the band of upper level winds beginning to move off to the northeast at this point, but still at 2 a.m. we see an overlap of these two right in the area of the tornado. And the storms at this point had progressed, of course, right in the Evansville area, southeast corner of Vanderburgh County, moving into Warwick County at this point. And our Storm Prediction Center indicated a slight risk as of 7 a.m. on November 5th for the night of the tornado event. The tornado graphic probability is quite low, 5%, but anytime we have any probability, that's something certainly to take note of because those probabilities by nature tend to be quite small. Many times they're only 5–10% when we have tornadoes across the area. Some of the worst events can be up 30% or higher, but again, for most events, they tend to be quite low. The probabilistic damaging wind graphic, 25%, and that was generally thought to be more of a greater concern. Some concern for hail as well, but mainly to the west of our region. But when we dig into the discussion, we can see here the Storm Prediction Center does indicate possible tornadoes in parts of Missouri, Illinois, western Kentucky, and western Indiana, given the strength of the shear and the low-level moisture return, which we have just looked at. And when we look at the Storm Prediction Center outlook updated at 7 o'clock that evening, we do continue to see some concern for storms overnight, and there's even a mention along with the potential for a tornado or two with these rotating features, and that's what we did have, two intense tornadoes, two EF3s, Crittenden County and the Evansville area tornado. At 8:53, an update was issued. That's a discussion and talking about the watch expected to be issued shortly, and in fact that occurred at 9:30 p.m. Here we have a severe thunderstorm watch, which again tells us that the concern was more for non-tornadic storms, but with potential for an isolated tornado or two, as we just read. At 9:56, our office in Paducah did issue the first severe thunderstorm warning of the evening. That was in southeast Missouri, and as the evening progresses, the storms get even closer. Here's a look at the actual warnings issued by the National Weather Service in Paducah for this event, for the Evansville area tornado. First, we have a tornado warning here for western Henderson County, Posey County, until 2 a.m. Also notice the fast forward motion of this storm northeast at 60 miles an hour. And a few minutes later, we issued the tornado warning, which is for the Evansville area itself. Tornado warning for southern Vanderburgh County until 2:15 a.m. Note the specific mention of Evansville. The tornado is expected to be near Evansville by 1:55 a.m. And unfortunately, that came to fruition. And here we're looking at the radar reflectivity data, some pretty crude looking radar data now that we're used to looking at the super resolution reflectivity data. But nonetheless, we can see the storms progress across the area. But notice in particular this part of the storm here, because that's what produces the tornado as it progresses across Henderson, Vanderburgh, then Henderson again, and then into Vanderburgh County and Warwick County as it moves to the east. Here we're looking at the storm relative velocity from the Paducah National Weather Service radar. That's very important to note because anytime you're looking at velocity data, you have to know which radar you're looking at to know whether you have inbound or outbound values. Red, yellow, and orange colors indicate motion away from the radar. Blue and green colors indicate motion toward the radar. So we're looking at this developing rotation over Union County, Illinois, just southwest of Cobden. The time is 12:06 a.m. and we'll progress in time, and we can see the circulation moving off to the northeast. Not much change, even a little weakening perhaps as we get along the Williamson-Johnson County border. But then we see some greater organization at 12:37 a.m., the current time. 33 knots of rotational velocity at 2,200 feet above ground level. Still not a lot of change. The next few volume scans, now we're just before 1 a.m., 12:57 a.m. 39 knots of rotational velocity at 3,200 feet above the ground level. Of course, the storm is getting further and further from the Paducah radar site. And at some point, we'll need to start looking at the Evansville, Indiana radar, which is the radar about 20 miles or so northwest of Evansville, Indiana. And here we are at 1:02 a.m., 37 knots of rotation at 3,500 feet. 37 knots, again 37 knots, 1:12 a.m. Then we increase, a substantial increase to 45 knots, 4,600 feet above the ground, but this qualifies as a strong mesocyclone at this point. The storm's about to move into Posey County, the southern tip of Posey County. 46 knots, 5,000 feet, 1:23 a.m., 72 knots. So some pretty dramatic increase in storm relative velocity data at this point. And so we will start taking a look at the Evansville, Indiana radar. We have 40 knots of rotation at 32 miles from the radar versus 59 miles from the Paducah radar. And almost identical in time, the Evansville or Evansville radar data is 2 minutes sooner, 1:26 a.m. Here we are at 1:33 a.m., 42 knots of rotational velocity, 5,800 feet. Again, strong mesocyclone. This is just a short time before tornado touchdown. Evansville radar, 40 knots at 2,300 feet. Again, much lower to the ground. 60 knots of rotation at 1:38 a.m. This is just very near the touchdown time north of Smith Mills in Henderson County. Evansville radar, 45 knots at 2,100 feet, 1:39 a.m. And this is about as close as we can get to tornado touchdown. As we progress, 1:43 a.m., 50 knots from the Paducah radar. Much better vantage, at least in the lower levels, with the Evansville radar, 54 knots at 2,000 feet. 72 knots from the Paducah radar, maintaining a strong mesocyclone. At 1:48 a.m., the storm, the tornado has moved across Vanderburgh County, the southern part of Vanderburgh County at this point, about to cross the Ohio River for the second time and move back into Henderson County. Here we're looking at the Evansville radar, 54 knots at 23 nautical miles, only 2,200 feet, 1:51 a.m. 54 knots as the tornado is passing across the Ohio River for the third time. This is around Ellis Park. 1:53 a.m., 54 knots, but the Evansville radar, and we'll focus on the Evansville radar from here on out, 56 knots of rotation, 23 nautical miles, 1,800 feet above the ground, 1:58 a.m., and it's about at this point in time the tornado is moving through Eastbrook Mobile Home Park, where again 20 people lost their lives. 2:04 a.m., 59 knots of rotation in the Newburgh area. 59 knots at 1:10 a.m. south of Boonville, very tight rotation. Still a very strong tornado at this point. And at 1:16 a.m., 44 knots, so we begin to lose some of the rotation. The couplet's not quite as tight at this point as well, 2,300 feet above ground level. And then we can see at 1:22 a.m. we really lose the circulation as the tornado probably ropes out at this point, becomes very thin as it moves just into Spencer County. Okay, I'd like to shift gears and talk about one of the very positive outcomes of this tragic tornado event of November 6, 2005, and that is that in the Evansville tri-state region we have more people owning weather radios per capita than anywhere in the United States. We know this both from data from our National Weather Service headquarters and also from Midland Radio, which is probably the largest manufacturer of weather radios in the United States. And you can see a couple of the outcomes of that, and that is weather radio programming campaigns that we conducted across the area. The one on the top left picture is at the mall on Green River Road in Evansville. We had probably a couple thousand people that came out for that event, a tremendous turnout. We got some national exposure, which helped promote weather radios nationally. You can see Mike Seidel with myself and Kelly Hooper, and that's around Eastbrook Mobile Home Park. So again, very tragic event, but this was one of the very positive outcomes. People are generally much more prepared overall, in addition to weather radio ownership, so we're very happy to see that. And I'll end with this picture. This is a truck that was tossed by the tornado just probably seconds after it let down north of Smith Mills, Kentucky. If you want more information on this event or more weather information in general, you can go to weather.gov/PAH or /Paducah. If you want more information on this event, specifically what you need to do is click on Items of Interest on the left menu, and then there will be another link that says Past or Historical Storms, and then you can navigate by date to this particular event and get more detailed information on this. And with that, we thank you for watching.